You've been lied to about how change works. Not by any one person, not deliberately. Just by the way everyone around you talks about it. You just need more discipline. You need to want it bad enough. Set a goal, write it down, make it happen. And so you do. You write the goal. You feel the motivation. You start strong. Then 2 weeks pass, the motivation fades. Old patterns creep back in, and you end up in the exact same place. Only now with an extra layer of shame for having failed again. Here's what nobody tells you. The problem was never your discipline. It was never your desire. It was your understanding of how behavior actually works. And once you understand the real mechanism underneath every habit, everything changes. Not because you try harder, but because you stop fighting a battle that was rigged against you from the beginning. That's what Atomic Habits by James Clear lays out, and today we're going deeper than the usual 5 highlights. We're going into the chapters most people skip, the science most summaries leave out, the ideas that don't make for catchy quotes but completely change how you see yourself. Here's what we'll cover today. Why your brain stores habits the same way a country stores gold, and why withdrawing from that reserve takes almost no effort. Why the single most powerful change you can make has nothing to do with your routine and everything to do with what you believe about yourself. The strange reason that good habits, once locked in, can actually work against you. A rule from psychology that explains why both boredom and obsession destroy progress, and the hidden cost of becoming too attached to any single identity. Stay with me. This one will shift something. Let's get into it. Act 1. The real reason you keep reverting. Picture this. A soldier comes home from Vietnam. He had been using heroin almost every day for months, surrounded by it, stress everywhere, easy access. Fellow soldiers doing the same. Every expert at the time would have predicted the worst. Heroin addiction was considered a one-way street. You get hooked, you stay hooked. Maybe for life. But something extraordinary happened. When researchers tracked what happened to these soldiers after they returned home, they found that 9 out of 10 of them, 90%, quietly stopped using. No long rehab programs, no years of counseling. They just stopped. Now compare that to the typical drug user who goes to a clinic to get clean, leaves the clinic, returns to their old neighborhood, old friends, old cues. 90% of them relapse. The same substance, the opposite outcome. James Clear uses this story to make a point most people have never considered about themselves. The habit was never really inside the soldier. It was inside the environment. When the environment changed, completely, radically, the habit had no cue to attach to. No trigger to fire. It simply faded. This is what researchers call cue-induced wanting. Your brain doesn't crave a behavior in the abstract. It craves it because something around you triggered the craving. A smell, a location, a time of day, a feeling, a person. The soldier didn't need more willpower. He got a new environment. And here's the part that should make you rethink everything you've tried so far. When scientists study people who appear to have tremendous self-control, the ones who seem to never struggle, they find something surprising. Those people aren't fighting their urges any harder than you are. They've simply structured their lives so they encounter temptation less often. Disciplined people don't resist temptation better. They encounter it less. This means the question to ask yourself isn't, how do I resist this? It's, how do I design my day so that this isn't even in front of me? Your environment is shaping your behavior right now, whether you designed it or not. The food on your counter, the apps on your phone's home screen, the couch facing the television. Each one is a cue your brain has already learned to respond to. Not because you chose those responses consciously, but because your brain, being the efficient machine it is, automated them for you. Here's how to think about this. Your brain has about 11 million sensory receptors in your body. 10 million of them are dedicated to vision alone. Half your brain's resources are used on sight. What your eyes land on is what your behavior follows. This is why things placed in front of you get used. Things placed out of sight get forgotten. The apples at the bottom of the refrigerator go bad. The cookies on the counter get eaten. This isn't weakness. This is neuroscience. So if you want to change your behavior, start with your surroundings. Move the trigger. Redesign the space. Because fighting cues you haven't removed is like bailing out a boat without plugging the hole. You can keep working, but the water keeps coming in. Act 2. the hidden pull of every purchase you make. Here's a story from 18th century France that explains why your spending habits are harder to break than you think. A philosopher named Denis Diderot spent most of his life poor. Then one day, the Empress of Russia paid him a fortune for his personal library. Suddenly, he had money. And what did he do with it? He bought himself a beautiful scarlet robe. And that robe, that one purchase, changed everything. He looked at his scarlet robe and noticed that everything else around it looked shabby by comparison. So he replaced the rug, then the mirror, then the furniture, then the kitchen table. One purchase led to the next. A chain reaction that economists now call the Diderot Effect. Obtaining one new possession creates a spiral of consumption, leading to additional purchases. You buy a new phone. Suddenly the phone case looks cheap. You upgrade the case. Now the desk looks outdated. You've felt this, we all have. James Clear uses this as an entry point into one of his most practical ideas, habit stacking. Because the Diderot Effect reveals something true about human behavior that goes far beyond shopping. We don't do things in isolation. Every action becomes a cue for the next one. Bad habits chain themselves automatically. You sit down on the couch. That triggers picking up your phone. Scrolling triggers another scroll. Staying up late triggers waking up tired. Waking up tired triggers bad food choices. One chain, all day, built from a single starting cue. Habit stacking is about intentionally building your own chain, linking a new behavior you want to a behavior you already do automatically. Not because you force it, but because the sequence fires naturally. The formula is simple. After I do this existing thing, I will do this new thing. After you pour your morning coffee, you review your budget for 2 minutes. After you sit down at your desk, you write 1 sentence in a journal. After you brush your teeth at night, you read 3 pages of a book. The existing habit becomes the trigger. You're not adding effort, you're borrowing momentum. Your brain already runs the first behavior on autopilot. Now you just add the second one directly after it. There's a key rule here that most people miss. The new habit needs to match the frequency of the existing one. If you want to review your finances daily, don't stack it onto something you only do on Sundays. Stack it onto something that happens every single day without thought. The chain works because human behavior follows momentum. Once you're in motion, continuing is far easier than starting. And once you've built several links in the chain, you've created what Clear calls a habit stack, a full sequence that runs almost without any decision-making at all. And that's the goal, not a life of more discipline, a life where the right behaviors require almost no discipline, because the system is doing the work. Act 3. Why the person you think you are is running your life. Here's the deepest idea in the entire book, and it's the one most people walk past without stopping. Every behavior you repeat isn't just something you do. It's evidence you're collecting, slowly without noticing, about who you believe yourself to be. James Clear calls this identity-based change, and it's the complete opposite of how most people try to build habits. The typical approach goes like this. You set a goal, lose 20 pounds, save $500 a month, read more. Then you build a system around it, a schedule, a tracker, a reminder. And you hope that if you do these things long enough, you'll eventually become someone who does them naturally. But Clear argues, this gets the order exactly backward. If your identity doesn't change first, your system will eventually fail. Because anytime the behavior becomes inconvenient, when you're tired, stressed, busy, you'll make an exception. And you'll justify the exception with 3 words you probably know well. This isn't me. But what if it was? What if instead of saying, I'm trying to save more money, you started saying, I'm the kind of person who thinks carefully about money? What if instead of, I'm trying to exercise, you said, I'm an active person? The word sounds small. The effect is not. Here's why. Your brain is constantly building a case for who you are. Every time you skip the workout, it files that as evidence, not an athlete. Every time you scroll instead of read, it files that as evidence, not a reader. And every time you do the thing, however small, it files that as evidence for the new identity. As Clear puts it, every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. You don't need a majority all at once. You just need to keep casting votes. Over time, the evidence accumulates. And at some point, the belief shifts. Not because you forced it, but because the proof is undeniable. This is also why tiny habits work so much better than dramatic ones. A person trying to change their identity doesn't need to run 5 miles on day 1. They need one small action that says, I am the kind of person who moves their body. 1 push-up, 1 walk, 1 glass of water instead of soda. The action is almost irrelevant in terms of its physical impact. What matters is what it signals to you about you. The same logic applies to money, to learning, to discipline. You don't need to save $100. You need one action that says, I am someone who thinks about my financial future. Then another, then another. Each vote small, the accumulation enormous. Act 4, the dark side of good habits. Nobody warns you about. Here's something James Clear says that almost nobody talks about when they summarize this book. Good habits can quietly destroy your growth. That sounds impossible. But here's how it happens. In chess, a beginner spends enormous mental effort remembering how each piece moves. That's conscious, exhausting work. But after enough repetition, those movements become automatic. And that's when the real game begins. Because now the mind is free to think about strategy, positioning, and patterns instead of basic movement. Habits, in that way, are the foundation of mastery. They free up mental space. But here's the danger. Once a habit becomes automatic, you stop noticing it closely. You stop receiving feedback from it. You stop improving it. You lock in your current level of performance. And then you stay there, repeating it forever, believing you're progressing because you're showing up. As Clear puts it, you assume you're getting better because you're gaining experience. But in reality, you're just reinforcing what you already do. A surgeon who has performed the same procedure hundreds of times begins to cut slightly differently. Small inefficiencies built up, without ever realizing it. An investor who has made the same type of analysis for years may stop stress testing assumptions. A person who has been budgeting for 2 years may keep using a system that no longer fits their life. The solution Clear offers is both simple and underused. Habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery. Not just habits. Habits plus the intentional effort to look at what the habit is producing, question whether it's still working, and refine it. He calls this reflection and review, and he uses the Los Angeles Lakers as his example. In 1986, the Lakers had one of the most talented rosters in NBA history. They started the season 29-5. Everyone said they might be the greatest team ever assembled. Then they fell apart in the playoffs. Their coach, Pat Riley, was done relying on raw talent. He created what he called the Career Best Effort Program. He tracked each player's baseline performance across dozens of statistics, including things like diving for loose balls and helping a teammate being beaten. Then he asked each player to improve their personal score by just 1% over the course of the season. 1%. Not double your output. Not reach a new level. Just 1% better than your own baseline. 8 months later, they won the championship. The following year, they won it again, the first repeat in 20 years. The lesson isn't that talent is overrated. It's that talent without a system for continuous honest feedback will plateau. And comfortable habits, without that feedback loop, will keep you at the plateau forever while you believe you're still climbing. The question to ask regularly isn't, am I showing up? You probably are. The question is what I'm doing still working? And am I even paying attention closely enough to know? Act 5, the Goldilocks Trap. Why motivation collapses and how to fix it. In 1955, a 10-year-old boy walked into Disneyland on its opening day and asked for a job. He started selling guidebooks, eventually moved into the magic shop, practiced tricks on visitors, tried out jokes, started performing stand-up in tiny clubs across Los Angeles, sometimes literally performing to empty rooms. He didn't go viral. He didn't get discovered overnight. He spent a decade experimenting, adjusting, refining, performing 20-minute sets, 30-minute sets, slowly expanding, but only by a little each time. That boy was Steve Martin, and he described his rise this way: 10 years spent learning, 4 years spent refining, 4 years as a wild success. What kept him showing up for 18 years of near invisibility? James Clear calls it the Goldilocks rule, and it explains both why motivation collapses and how to rebuild it. The human brain experiences peak motivation when working on tasks that sit right at the edge of its current ability. Not too easy, boredom sets in. Not too hard, anxiety shuts you down. Just slightly beyond what you can currently do with ease. That narrow zone is where full engagement lives, where time disappears, where you forget to check your phone. Researchers call this flow, and Clear's data suggests you hit it when a challenge is roughly 4% beyond your current ability. Not 40, not 400. 4. Steve Martin wasn't running on passion every night he performed to an empty room. He was running on a challenge that was just slightly bigger than his current capability. Each year, 1 or 2 new minutes of material. Never so much that he felt overwhelmed. Always enough to keep him reaching. This explains something most people misunderstand about motivation. They assume the highly successful feel more motivated than the rest of us, that they burn hotter, that success comes from a deeper reservoir of drive. But an elite weightlifting coach that Clear interviews says something different when asked what separates the best athletes from everyone else. He pauses, then he says, "At some point it comes down to who can handle the boredom of doing the same thing over and over again. Not passion, tolerance for boredom. Because here's what happens when you've been doing something long enough that you're actually good at it. The beginner gains disappear. The rapid early progress flattens. The feedback gets quieter. And on any given day, the habit feels ordinary, routine, not exciting at all. And that's when most people jump to something new. A new workout program, a new savings strategy, a new morning routine. Not because the old one stopped working, but because it stopped being novel. The brain tagged it as boring. And so the search begins again, for the new thing that will finally stick. But professionals don't do this. A professional shows up on the days when the habit feels ordinary, especially on those days, because mastery lives on the other side of boredom, not on the other side of novelty. The real question isn't, how do I stay motivated? It's, how do I keep the challenge calibrated so there's always just enough difficulty to keep me engaged? But not so much that I give up? Add a slightly harder variation. Measure a more specific thing. Raise the standard incrementally. Don't chase a new system. Evolve the one you have. Act 6. The Identity Trap. When becoming who you are stops you from growing. There's one final idea in this book that almost nobody talks about, and it's the most uncomfortable one. The habits that build your identity can eventually trap you inside it. Think about that for a second. James Clear argues that the most powerful way to change behavior is to tie it to identity. I am a reader. I am an active person. I am someone who manages money well. These identity statements work because behavior that's tied to who you are doesn't feel optional. But here's the shadow side. The more tightly any single identity is woven into who you are, the harder it becomes to evolve beyond it. Because changing the behavior means threatening the identity, and the brain defends identity fiercely. Investor Paul Graham calls this keeping your identity small. The idea is this: the more you let a single belief define you, the less capable you are of adapting when life changes around you. You've seen this in people: the retired athlete who can't find purpose after the game ends, the founder who falls apart after selling the company, the professional who becomes defensive the moment someone questions their expertise. When the role disappears, the person disappears with it. And it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It happens slowly in everyday habits too. The person who defines themselves as a saver may resist investing because investing feels like giving up control of money. The person who defines themselves as not a math person avoids understanding financial statements, even when it would help them enormously. The identity that was once your strength becomes a wall. The solution isn't to abandon identity-based change. It's to hold your identities more loosely, to tie them to values and character, rather than specific roles or methods. Instead of I am a budgeter, say, I am someone who takes financial decisions seriously. Instead of I am debt-free, say, I am someone who thinks long-term about money. The value stays constant. The specific behavior stays flexible. Water, as Lao Tzu wrote, is soft and yielding, and it carves through stone. The rigid thing breaks, the adaptable thing prevails. This is the final level of what James Clear is building toward. Not just better habits, not just stronger identity, but an identity that can bend without breaking. One that doesn't require you to defend a particular method, only a particular character. Let's bring this together. You don't need more willpower. You need a different environment, one where the right choices are visible and the wrong ones are out of reach. You don't need to force new habits. You need to chain them to the ones that already run automatically. You don't need to accomplish more goals. You need to become someone for whom these behaviors are simply what you do. But then you need to keep looking, because good habits plateau. Comfort breeds invisibility. Review what's working, raise the standards slightly, consistently, and hold your identity loosely enough that it grows with you, rather than boxing you in. James Clear distills the whole book into one sentence at the end. Small habits don't add up, they compound. That's true of your health, it's true of your knowledge, and it's absolutely true of your finances. The person who understands money really understands it at the level of habits and systems and identity. Doesn't just make better individual decisions. Over time, those small decisions compound into a life that looks completely different from the one that would have happened on autopilot. The autopilot version of your life is already running. The question is whether you designed it or inherited it from your environment, your friends, your default routines. Now you have the tools. Start with one small action. Stack it onto something you already do. Let it cast a vote for who you're becoming. Review it honestly. Adjust it slightly. And keep going, especially on the days when it feels boring. That's it. That's the whole game.